Still Saka, onto that left. Another Boxing Day belter, Bukayo Saka.
Bukayo Saka. 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 Bukayo Saka.
This is Arsecast Extra.
Hello and welcome to another Arsecast Extra, as always, with James from Gunnerblog. James, festive, goodly afternoon to you even.
Festive, goodly afternoon to you too, and to all the listeners. Hope you're having a good festive period, and hope it's ongoing. Hope you're sort of managing to stretch it out into the new year.
Yeah, those like morning beers, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. Basically, exactly that.
Yeah. How was your Christmas? Hope you had a nice time.
It was good, thanks. Yeah, quite low key, but good. Went to my in-laws, and yeah, it was lovely. How was yours?
Again, very low key, obviously, given the world we're living in at the moment. So just a nice family dinner, and yeah, just lots of food and watching stuff on TV and movies and things like that. So good Christmas stuff, stuff you don't have time to do normally. So.
No, exactly. It's nice. It's nice.
And
we've got a bit more time than we thought we would have, I guess, what with Arsenal not playing Wolves right now.
Yes. I mean, that's what should be going on right at this very minute. We should be, what I would say, 3-0 up at this point?
Yeah. 7 or 8, maybe. What, is it half an hour into the game?
It's not even half-time,
Oh, okay, yeah. Maybe the
second half goal flurry to come,
Sure. Yeah, no, it does feel slightly odd that I'm supposed to be out the ground right now. But hey, it gives us an opportunity to spend maybe more time than we would have done reflecting on Arsenal's 5-0 win over Norwich.
Yes, it does. I mean, and it's a shame. I think we should just acknowledge that while everyone can understand why a game might be postponed, and for clubs and the Premier League authorities and officials and everything else, is a little bit of a headache for them when it comes to rescheduling and trying to fit fixtures in and all that. But for fans, who come from near and far, it is a real kick in the nuts when you've made plans. If you're a local guy who lives just around the corner, it's not as inconvenient than if you're coming from, further away, whether it's across the Atlantic or whatever it might be. But it's still a bad thing for supporters, even if you can understand why things like this happen. So I'm sorry for anybody out there who was planning to come to the game and then couldn't. And I've had, plenty of messages and tweets from people who were planning to do exactly that. And circumstances being what they are, it is off. We all understand why. But it's worth taking a moment just to acknowledge that, for fans, this is something just a bit more than a mild inconvenience. Definitely.
And I think it being the time of year that it is, people have time off work, they make plans to come, as you say, often from abroad. This might be the first Arsenal game they're coming to, might be the only game they're coming to this decade, and for it to be called off is a heart-wrenching thing. I saw Granit Xhaka reached out to one fan and offered them tickets for the Man City game, but obviously that's not going to be everybody's experience. So as fantastic as that was, I have huge sympathy with other people whose plans are disrupted, and there's going to be more disruption, I'm sure. It's that curious thing of it. So it's quite a good thing probably for Mikel Arteta and Arsenal, who were probably quite worried about playing twice in 48 hours and then having to face Man City. But for fans, and ultimately the matches happen primarily to entertain fans, it's not great.
What do you think about the postponement then, just leaving that part aside? Was there a part of you that thought, actually, this could be quite good for us? Because look, we were going to play twice in 48 hours. And I think if you're going to play against a team that's also played twice in 48 hours, it's not ideal. I don't think it's great for the players. I don't think it's great for the quality of the games that you get when you ask players to perform at that level in such a short space of time. But it would have been the case that Wolves had basically 10 days rest going into this game. So from that point of view, even though we've got momentum, and I think fatigue is one of those things which really impacts you when things aren't going particularly well. When you're playing well and when you're feeling confident and happy about your football, you don't necessarily notice the aches and the niggles and the strains as much as you would if, you're having a difficult time. So I was a little bit torn on that I thought, actually the momentum is good. Maybe we could just make a few changes here and there, give it a good push against Wolves and then see how we are for Man City. But maybe the best thing for us, not so much for the Man City game, but maybe for whenever we play Wolves, is that we will have either a bit more time between the games, or B, if there is some fixture congestion, it's on both sides and there isn't one coming into it with a real advantage and the other with a big handicap.
Yeah, I think that was what was particularly tricky about the Wolves situation, that I think we would have played 2 games in the period where they'd essentially not had any. And of course, not training or having players ill or injured is not an ideal preparation for them either. But I did worry slightly about that aspect of it. On the other hand, we're playing really well. We've got momentum. It's a home game. I think you would have fancied Arsenal probably to win that one. They'd have a good chance, certainly, of winning that one. And it might have, given us a more secure position in the table. I'm sort of equivocal about it. I think it changes a little bit how I feel about the Man City game. I feel like we've got a bit more time to prepare for that, and it makes me feel a little bit more optimistic, maybe, about what we might be able to produce against them. Okay. No, you don't think so?
Well, I mean, I think, on paper it does, but look, maybe we'll deal with that in a second. I know what you're saying exactly. We should be better prepared. We should be more rested. And, in theory, we should be better able to cope with whatever's going to happen on the day. But I just, I have some concerns about the record that we have in these kind of games. Well, maybe we'll keep that for the second part of the show. I think I might have a question.
I just think I think if we had the Wolves game, I think that it would have been the smart thing to put our energy and our focus on winning that. And in case Sarah against Man City, I think having a bit more lead-up time slightly shifts that. Yeah. But I do think that these postponements are problematic, actually. Increasingly, I am a little bit concerned about kind of the integrity of the competition. I mean, it's things like, Spurs have got, whatever it is, 3 games in hand or something like that. If they go out in January and buy 3 players, they will have a different lineup for those fixtures than they would have had, potentially a stronger one. I think that, you see Crystal Palace tried to get a game called off the other day against Spurs, actually, and when they ended up playing, there was no enforced changes to their starting lineup. And I kind of feel like, I mean, granted, it wasn't called off ultimately, but I do think the lack of transparency around why games are and aren't happening is a bit of a problem.
Do you think that maybe we know now that there is a bar where you've got to have 13 outfield players and a goalkeeper to go ahead with the game. And if you don't have that, the game doesn't go ahead. But where do you stand on the COVID plus injuries aspect of this, in that, you might have 8 injuries and 2 COVID cases, and that might be reason to get the game called off? Is that fair? Is that not just something that clubs should have to deal with? Like, what happens in ordinary circumstances if a club has 8, 9, 10 injuries plus suspensions? Is that not just something that they have to deal with? Because of whatever their squad building, or because of their behavior, or because of, whatever it might be. That is something they're going to have to do. You can't just get a load of players sent off and suspended and a few players injured and blah, 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 and then say, look, we can't play. Sorry about that.
It's really tricky because obviously they named their 25-man squads at the start of the season, and I presume the 13 have to be kind of derived from that. But of course, they've all largely got academy squads who are all eligible to play in these games as well. Maybe my position is kind of influenced by the fact that Arsenal have got off relatively light on the injury and illness front thus far.
Well,
but I think that. Or do you not think that? I think that.
Well, I mean, I think in some ways, but I mean, we've had a number of COVID cases recently. We'd 4 right backs missing for the Norwich game, so I know that's not sufficient for the game to be postponed or called off or anything like that. But yeah, maybe we've been lucky in that whatever injuries and COVID absences we've had, we've been able to cope with. But I just wonder if other clubs, is it A, that they have had more injuries and COVID cases, or B, are they not managing the protocols well enough to avoid COVID cases, in which case that's another big discussion, isn't it?
Yeah, and also if you have to close the training ground, it becomes very difficult to function as a club, as a team. You know, if you can't train as a group, then fulfilling matches, I think, is extremely unlikely. So that's sort of like the extreme case. But I having sort of, you know, we're all finding out about this as we go along. But my position now is kind of, I sort of think these games should be being played. And I kind of feel like if that meant 6 kids in the starting lineup, I sort of think that would be the right thing to do, actually. It seems odd to me that we're making such big concessions. Obviously, if a club has a very serious outbreak of illness or has to do a deep clean on their entire training ground and can't train, then I appreciate they can't play. But if it's a case of, well, we'd have to promote kids from the academy, then I sort of think so be it.
Well, this is where it comes back to the issue that you mentioned at the start, which is transparency. When it comes to a club being looking for a game called off, should there not be a public declaration of what the issue is? Like, we've got 8 COVID cases, we've got 3 hamstrings, a couple of suspensions, blah, blah, blah. That way people can look at it and go, actually, yeah, you can see how that would be a good idea, because there is obviously a health concern for players that have COVID. You don't want anyone spreading it, but we don't know what the balance is. A percentage of the absences should be down to COVID if you're having a game called off for COVID. So,
but in an ordinary year, like in a pre-COVID year, how many players at this time of year are playing with an injury or with a cold?
Yeah.
I'd say a pretty high percentage. And so where's that line between an injury that I could play with, but in order to get this game called off, we're going to report it as something significant?
Yeah, I think there might be some gaming of the circumstances going on, to be perfectly honest. But look, go on. Sorry.
They're all carrying injuries all the time. Do you know what I mean? And particularly when the game's coming as thick and fast as they are now. So yeah, it's I think Arsenal playing twice in 48 hours, that's a kind of separate issue, and one that was probably unnecessary and could have been scheduled differently. And for that reason, I'm sort of pleased that it's off, as much as I'm sorry for those fans who've made plans. But, yeah, generally, I do wonder if some of these games could be fulfilled and if that might be better.
Yeah. Okay, well, look, let's move on and let's talk about what we did at Norwich, because it was very good, very fun, very enjoyable. Even if we did have 4 COVID absences, 4 right backs, Tomiyasu, Chambers, Cedric and Ainsley Maitland-Niles, all missing due to COVID, according to a club update, which meant that there was one change from the team that beat Leeds. That was Ben White moving to right back, Rob Holding coming in at centre half, and everything else was the same. Very much a case, I think, of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Don't tinker with something that is working as well as it has been working of late. So, I mean, the first half, or the way that we played, the way that we started, the way that we scored that early goal, it just seems that this is a club, or a team rather, that is really beginning to feel confident in what it's doing, where it's doing it on the pitch, and how effective it can be in doing it. I mean, the 5 goals that we scored in this game make it 14 from our last 4 in the Premier League. When you add in the goals that we scored against Sunderland, it's 19 goals in 5 games, which is as close to a glut as ever we've got under Mikel Arteta. We're not a very glutty team when it comes to goal scoring. So this is a very nice development.
Yeah, there's a crazy stat of Arsenal have scored more than 4 goals in 3 consecutive games, albeit in all competitions, for the first time since 1991.
Wow.
So, yeah, we never did that at any point in Arsene Wenger's reign. So this is a glut by any measure, and something to revel in. Just touching on that right-back thing, by the way, I didn't know when the team was announced. I was still in the car on the way to the stadium, and I didn't know about the COVID situation that had affected Tomiyasu, Cedric, Maitland-Niles. But I just assumed that Tomiyasu was still injured and thought, well, I thought White had been picked, basically, to be the right-back.
Yeah.
Just because I wonder if Mikel Arteta, perhaps like me, is not entirely convinced by some of the alternatives. And I think Rob Holding is our best sub-defender in some respects. So I'd sort of rather him come in than some of those guys at right back.
Yes, I tend to agree. Like, you know, Cedric, doesn't do it for me, to be honest. Chambers has had his chances and isn't really in the squad. Ainsley Maitland-Niles, who I think we'll probably talk about a bit later on in relation to another issue, you know, doesn't want to play there or hasn't wanted to play there, even though he says he will play there, but, you know, isn't being picked there. And really, when we talk about, you know, 4 right-back options, he is an emergency right-back option. I don't think he's a credible option in the mind of the manager, because when he has played this season, he has played in midfield. So I do think the Ben White selection was interesting, even if it was kind of enforced, because he has played there a bit in the past, hasn't he?
He has, yeah. I think he did it for Brighton once or twice. And am I right in thinking that Chambers wasn't actually cited as a COVID case?
I think he was. I'll go and check while you continue.
It's just specifically the right back area of the dressing room, the place where all the right backs sit. There'd been a lot of transmission in that part.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think White has all the tools to play in that role as Arsenal do it. You know, we've spoken about Tomiyasu almost being a third centre half at times, and White is, you know, very adept on the ball. We saw some good crossfield passes from him. One set up a chance for Martinelli that was disallowed for offside. So yeah, I think he was quite a good fit, and I think it destabilised our defence less than it would have done to bring, say, Cedric in.
You are right to say that about Chambers. It was Cedric, Tomiyasu and Maitland-Niles all missed today's squad after testing positive with COVID. But was Chambers not absent from the previous game because of COVID?
I think, weirdly enough, I think he was at Leeds that for the first time on the bench since the Man City game,
right?
Because we had suffered a couple of other COVID cases. I think it was Sambi Lokonga and maybe I can't remember. There was somebody else, and I remember thinking, "Oh, Chambers is back on the bench," and then this week we need it right back, and he's not again. I mean, I think his time at Arsenal may be coming to an end sooner rather than later. It seems to me, you know, just based purely on the fact that he's not being selected.
I think so, and we've spoken before about how when it comes to the physical profile he has, it's quite analogous with Tomiyasu. So it says a bit when he's not playing at all or not even making the bench. But let's talk about the players who did play, and Bukayo Saka, he really seems now to have found a bit of rhythm after what I suspect was a more difficult start to the season than many would have appreciated. You know, he went all the way in the European Championships with England. There was the fallout and all the emotional baggage, I think, that he would have had to contend with, having missed that penalty. It's a lot to deal with as a young player. I know he got a lot of support, but it's still something I'm sure that in your mind, when the lights go out at night, you're sitting there thinking about that a lot, not to mention the physical aspect of it. But, he's really looking like he's finding some form again, some rhythm again, some confidence again. The first goal, I think it was one of those, I think I said in the blog, it's one of those goals that looks quite easy, but I think it has something to do with playing the bottom of the table team and also second choice goalkeeper, which isn't to take anything away from him because, it's great to see him scoring and getting on the score sheet a bit more regularly of late is excellent. But a well-worked goal and nice to see Saka on the end of something and providing some end product, which I think is really going to stand him in good stead.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Dean Smith was pretty furious after the game about Norwich's willingness to let Saka come in from the right-hand side and shoot on his left foot. But I think you've got to give Saka credit too. His balance, his ability to shift his weight is really something. And we saw him do it actually a few times against Leeds the week before and not quite apply the finishing touch. This time he got it. And it was a great start. Arsenal are back to starting games well, which they have done for the majority of the season. There was a little period where they didn't quite have that intensity from the first whistle, but I think they're reclaiming that, and it was a big dent to Norwich's confidence because they had a decent performance recently against Manchester United side, who admittedly are in pretty poor form themselves. And I thought if they could sort of match that, they could provide a test for this Arsenal team. But they never really did, to be honest.
No. There was a period, I think, after the first goal. I mean, we scored after 16 minutes against Leeds and 6 minutes against Norwich. So those bright starts that you're talking about are good, and they help us be a bit more front-footed, I think. I don't want to sort of go into granular detail on all of the goals, but I think for the first two goals, we could talk about Gabriel Martinelli and his pressing. He chased down the defender who made a pass, which was then intercepted by Kieran Tierney, and the ball then moved across to Saka. And for the second goal, the way that he took off after the Norwich player, won the ball back, and then played a pass back into Martin Odegaard, who played it to Kieran Tierney on the overlap to score that second goal. The work that he is doing, even if he doesn't score, is helping us provide end product and helping us create attacking opportunities, which I think we're being really quite efficient with. I don't know, I'm sure somebody has done it, whether we're outperforming our XG or anything like that in these games, but we're being efficient with our finishing, more clinical, and that's sometimes been an issue for us in the not too distant past.
Yeah, definitely. I think we are slightly outperforming our XG, as is kind of always the case if you score 4 or 5 goals in a game. But I think our XG is hovering around sort of, in some of these big thrashings, around 3, which is still really, really good and suggests that it's not like we're fluking goals into the top corner from 30 yards. We are creating dangerous opportunities, and there were other chances in this game we might have taken. I mean, in that first half, you think of Alex Lacazette's header, for example, where he sort of weirdly didn't get any direction on it, just sort of headed it back where he came from. That was a great chance. I think Martinelli's work rate is a huge part of what makes him so valuable to this team. It's weird. I feel like at Arsenal, sometimes in recent years, we've had discussions of like, you can't ask this player to do that. It's not their game. I'm thinking of Mesut Ozil for a long period, and even sometimes Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. We're asking him to chase back, and it's not what he does. But then you look at the best teams in this league, Liverpool, Manchester City. Every single player does that. Every single player, and they are the best. And they work so hard off the ball. And Martinelli is one of those genuine two-way players who's as intense without the ball as he is with it. And it really has brought something to this team. And it's one of the big changes I think we've seen in this most recent little good run, the glut of goals that we're talking about. I do think winning the ball back sooner, higher, is creating chances for this team. And that second goal was a great example in terms of Norwich being unbalanced, all being over to one side, Tierney having all that space to run into. And obviously it's a brilliant ball from Odegaard and a really good finish as well.
It is a really good finish. And, we talked after the Everton game, if you remember, about the difficulty we had in winning the ball back high up the pitch and, how precise you need to be when you're playing from deep in order to score goals. Was it West Ham? No, it was Southampton, wasn't it? That great goal against Southampton where we worked it out from the back and upfield and Lacazette finished. But it was so precise and there's no real margin for error in that whereas now when you're looking at Martinelli and you're looking at the way he's turning over the ball and what we're doing with it, and we've got players with the pace and the athleticism and the ability to get into the box and get into those forward positions. There were a couple of moments. There was one, wasn't there? There was a Tierney pass that from the left-hand side that went behind everybody.
Missed everybody.
And it was one of those where I was like, wow, okay, maybe we need to work a little bit on staggering our runs into the box, but we'd, 4 or 5 players in the box?
Yeah. I think that was quite unfortunate. Yeah. I mean, really, really close to finding somebody there.
Yeah.
And that was encouraging. I mean, Norwich, a bit like Southampton, if I was designing a team for this Arsenal side to play against, and again, this is not to detract from anything we did, they would look a bit like Norwich because they press you quite high up the pitch, but not particularly well, which we love.
Yeah.
That's meat and drink to the likes of Ben White and Ramsdale and Partey to kind of pick through those lines. And then they actually played quite a high line against Arsenal, which with Martinelli and Saka going in behind just spelt big problems for them. But
yeah, I mean,
I still think we have to do our job, and I do think we did it very, very well on Boxing Day.
No, I agree. I don't think that tactic of Lacazette dropping deep and allowing Martinelli to run in was quite as effective because I think Norwich were a bit wise to it, having seen it in a few recent games. Yeah. And there was a period between the first and the second goal where the game, began to get a bit physical. I think that was Norwich's answer. There were a few kicks. There was one on Saka. There was an incident with Ben White making a tackle. Granit Xhaka got booked for being Granit Xhaka. I'm not quite sure what he got booked for. He went sliding in, and there was a bit of afters. But I don't know why Xhaka got booked and other people didn't. I mean, was that worrying in that period for you? Did you feel like maybe we were falling into a trap in the sense that, there was a bit more from the Norwich crowd? You don't want to get the home team fired up when you've got a 1-goal lead. But, that was the way that they were trying to counter the dominance that we had.
Yeah, and it was kind of all they had really on the day. And I have to be honest, I was sat there in the press box and I was thinking back to the Leeds game and Xhaka getting booked, somewhat unnecessarily there, and looking at that happening again. And my honest reaction in the moment was, oh, come on, Granit, keep it together. Yeah. Don't give these people a chance to come back into the game. I have slightly reflected on that position, and I wonder if I'm being a little unfair in that. Only in that I was listening to Arsenal Vision's pod immediately after the game,
right?
And Paul said, I was on the way back in the car. Paul Poznan in my pants said, it's very hard to say Poznan in my pants seriously, isn't it?
Yeah.
Said something like, when someone says something like, I wish I'd said that, I think that's really astute. And he was saying how that side of a player, the sort of malevolent, troublemaking, problematic's not the right word, but sort of overtly aggressive side is often characterised as kind of the defect in their game, but that actually within certain teams you do sometimes require a little bit of that there is a benefit to it. And it does strike me that in those 2 away games, when we've been getting a bit kicked off the park here and there, Xhaka has gone in and got involved in something and got himself a booking. And at home, we're all sat thinking, oh, God, Granit, don't do that. But I do wonder if his teammates respond to it in the same way. I do wonder if they appreciate it much more than we do.
Listen, I would be the first person to talk about how I want Arsenal to stand up for ourselves a bit more, to not be cowed by the physicality of other teams by some of the rotational fouling, some of the cynical, deliberate fouling. You know, when Saka gets kicked from behind again and again and again, like, I'm absolutely sure there are enough instances of Saka being kicked from behind that you could make one of those, you know, compilations with the NAF Europop tune, you know, in the background, just Saka getting booted and booted and booted. So I want our players to be a bit more in the face of the opposition. I want them to highlight this to the referee. I don't want us to sit there and take it lying down. I absolutely don't. So I'll hold my hands up with that. The thing with Xhaka is, it's like, it's the old Granit Xhaka index. What he does is viewed very much through the prism of him being Granit Xhaka and not him being an ordinary player. And there have been, as we know, some incidents where that aggression, or whatever you want to call it, that little bit of edge, that little bit of nastiness that I think every good team needs. Every single good team needs a bit of that from, you know, I don't know how you measure it on a scale, but you need it. The thing with Xhaka is there's always that just primal fear that because it's him that's getting involved, the punishment that's going to be meted out won't be commensurate with the in inverted commas, offense. Like, I don't know why he got involved. I don't know why he got booked. I genuinely don't know why he got booked.
No, I mean, Amy Lawrence did an interview with Granit that's come out today on The Athletic.
Yeah, it's very good. Yeah.
It is worth reading, and there's a good tidbit in it about, you know, an Arsenal player being told on the pitch after an incident where Granit was booked or sent off. The referee said, "Oh, well, you know, Granit, he loses his head," and that may be true, but the problem is once that perception exists amongst the referees, you're in a compromised position. So it is complicated. I suspect the likes of Saka, the likes of Smith Rowe, the likes of Martinelli probably appreciate it when, if they're getting a kicking, Xhaka goes in and stands up for them, be that by, you know, what he says to somebody or putting one on them himself. I'm sure they value that. The issue is as you say, there's a target on his back. So, you know, anything he does will be amplified in the eyes of the referee. So it's a very, very fine line to tread, because we don't have loads of those players in the team who you'd sort of say, well, they'll give them one back, you know. I did like Ben White's tackle, which came a few moments after that. Ben White's got a bit of it, all right, and he's kind of got this sort of, you know, red-cheeked choir boy look to him at times, but he really got stuck into that guy. It was one of those tackles that was perfectly fair, but it was like, okay, we're here too. We're going to dish a bit out as well if this is the way you're going to do it. And then whatever the dude that came over and just stood up in his face, and White was just having none of it. I like that about him, and I think maybe we might see a bit more of that begin to emerge over the coming weeks. And if the team continues to make progress, it is something that we are going to have to deal with a bit more, because good teams get kicked. That is the reality. You know, it happens in every single league, in every single Premier League we've ever seen. You know, the good teams get kicked. It's why that sort of iteration of Arsenal, you know, the Arsenal team where everyone said, well, they don't like it up them. The reason we got kicked was because half the time some of the teams couldn't live with the technical level that we had. So the only answer was, you know, to kick us. And we saw some unfortunate and unpleasant things happen as a consequence of that and as a consequence of that perception. But it is something that we're going to have to deal with if we continue to play well, and if we continue to, you know, put teams like Norwich, like Leeds, in the kind of compromised positions at home on their own grounds where the game is gone and the only way for them to respond and to sort of get fans back on side is physical intimidation. So I'm sure Mikel Arteta is well aware of this and the way that, you know, his players are going to have to react. But look, let's not dwell on that too much. Second half, there was a shout for a penalty. What did you think of that? Tierney shot. Do you know what? I actually haven't seen that back, and it wasn't on Match of the Day or any of the highlights packages I've seen, so I only saw it in real time, so you'll have to talk about that.
Look, it was very much ball to hand. His hand was a bit out, But you know the way I judge penalties, like how would I feel if that was given against Arsenal?
Yeah.
And I would be really unhappy because it was a belter of a shot. It was about 0.05 of a second between Tierney taking the shot and the ball hitting the hand. So I think it probably would have been harsh. I mean, I would have been really pissed off if that had been given at the other end. Martinelli had a goal disallowed for offside. And
only just.
And then Bukayo Saka did the Bukayo Saka thing again.
He did.
Yeah.
I like this goal a lot, actually.
Yeah.
There's a really nice pass from Martin Odegaard, who receives the ball in the kind of classic number 10 area, and it's just with the outside of his left foot. He almost sort of lifts it around the corner to Lacazette. It's a really subtle thing. I mean, he had a brilliant game, I thought, Odegaard.
We haven't even mentioned him. We're like 35 minutes into the podcast. We haven't even mentioned Martin Odegaard. He was absolutely brilliant, I thought.
Yes, There have been times this season where he has looked the best player on the pitch, and it's not just been, there were moments I thought in the first half against the North Spurs in the North London derby where he was just sensational, and when he is on it and when the circumstances are right, he is brilliant, and I was so impressed by him. I think that Arsenal's improvement in attack, I think a lot of it actually can be attributed to him. I think the way that he links play, his understanding of space, his use of the ball, the intelligence in his decision making, and the part that he plays in that off the ball side we talked about, pressing, winning it back earlier. I think he's been instrumental in that, really. And it's been a really good few weeks for him after I wouldn't say a bad start, but a slightly sticky start in terms of sort of coming into the team, coming out of it again, having to win his place back. Since then, I think he's been fantastic.
Yeah, I think so too. He's been really, really impressive. And actually, there's another part to that goal. After he plays that part to Lacazette, he makes a run into the box and he takes one of the central defenders across with him. And that central defender is keeping half an eye on him. And by the time Saka has come inside to take the shot, the centre half can't get back across in order to block it. So little small things like that added to his technical quality, his creativity. I mean, some of the little clip passes inside, the precision of them, even though the opposition must know he's thinking of them, they can't do anything about them. And that variation in the way that we move the ball in the opposition half is really, really important, because we're not talking right now, maybe we will at some point in the future, but we're not talking right now about the horseshoe. We're not talking about the inability to break the lines, which is something that we were concerned about at points this season. So I think you have to give Odegaard some credit for his work in that regard, in making us a little less predictable when we have the ball in the opposition half. I know there's a lot more to the improvement and everything else, but he has played a really big role in that. I think it's 3 goals and 3 assists in December for him. So yeah. It's a really good contribution, and we talked about needing players to step up and needing players to deliver, and yeah, he's doing it. He's doing it after, I don't want to say he was bad at the start of the season, but not quite at the level we thought he was going to be at.
No, and there were a couple of moments in this game. I feel there were sort of 2 or 3 nutmegs that he pulled off, like first time little touches between a player's legs. He was flying, to be honest, and it was great to watch. So I thoroughly enjoyed his performance. And Saka, great to see that end product side coming. I've always felt he will score goals. He just, as an academy player, he had such power and devastation in his finishing. I do think it's a matter of time, but that is an aspect of his game we've kind of looked at and thought maybe it's somewhere he could improve, and it's a good sign that he's making those contributions.
6 goals for him now this season, which is not bad.
No.
You would hope, at least for decent double figures from him in a season. If he can get to 12 goals, 14 goals, which is well within his capability, I think. There's an area I think he can really improve, and that is just the not the decision making, but the execution when he gets into shooting positions. It was very good against Norwich. There were a couple of occasions this season where it hasn't been quite as good. Was it the West Ham game or the Newcastle game maybe, where he picked up the ball and beat a couple of defenders really, really well to set up a great shooting position for himself.
Was Newcastle.
Yeah, and he just sort of shot tamely at the goalkeeper. And I think that is an area where a bit more power, a bit more, more emphasis. How do you say it? I don't quite know what the word is, but just more decisiveness in his shooting when he gets himself into good positions, because he gets into a lot of good positions.
Yeah, he does, and I think technically, in terms of the power, I think all the tools are there. He just needs to put it together. And good signs against Norwich. I think they did make life a little easier for him than many opponents will. But I think that scoring goals breed goals. That he'll take those finishes into the next opportunity that comes to him, and he'll hopefully take that with more confidence and assurance. So, yeah, I was really pleased to see him doing so well.
All right, then it's super sub Emile Smith Rowe. It's just crazy, isn't it? It's absolutely crazy what he's doing and how he's doing it. Brilliant. He came on, with 10 minutes to go, more or less, helped create the penalty. It was a really good movement, nice pass as well into Lacazette, where he got bundled off the ball in the box. But it was just really quick passing and moving around the opposition penalty area that Norwich couldn't deal with. It looks simple, but it's, you've still got to get in there and do that and make those movements and be willing to follow the ball and look for those opportunities.
Definitely. I think it was almost a 1-2-1, in terms of his interplay with Lacazette. They exchanged passes, and then Smith Rowe, the through ball to him is brilliant. He's not actually looking when he plays it. It's one of those kind of no-look reverse passes.
Yeah.
Lacazette gets there first, and he is becoming quite adept, shall we say, at being fouled in these dangerous positions. So he certainly has a knack of putting his body between himself and the ball, and he knows when he feels the contact, he's going down. I
was sure I saw a question actually about this, and it could be. Let me just see if I can. Let's see if I can find it. But basically, it was like maybe they deleted it. I can't find it now. But Lacazette has won a lot of penalties for us.
Yeah.
Don't know if I think the question was, has he won them all? I'm not quite sure, but he's certainly won quite a few.
He has, and if you look at the touch he takes on this one, he's sort of running towards the right corner flag, and he actually controls it with the outside of his right boot. If he was thinking about turning and shooting, he'd go outside the defender onto his right foot to shoot across goal, but he almost just stops the ball behind him. I think the only thing in his mind here is, I'm going to get a penalty. And in
smart.
fairness, he does, and he dispatches it. He missed that one the other day, but this one, I think he waited for the keeper basically and just put it in the corner. Yeah,
it was a good penalty. Smith Rowe then gets on the score sheet in injury time. I looked at this, I saw the replays, I was like, I think they're going to give him offside there. But
the camera angle, I think, was misleading, wasn't it? It made him look off, for sure.
Maybe it's just
I think it was
thick
an angle.
lines.
I think it was the angle. I think that because Smith Rowe, I don't know how quite to describe it, but I looked at it as well and I was like, that's offside. But then when I thought about it, the position of the camera, I think, influences that perception. We have to have faith in the lines, Andrew. If we don't have faith in the lines, what do we have?
Well, this is true. I mean, who are we to question the efficacy of lines, of VAR, of the officials or anything else? Look, I will say this. I would say, without wanting to sound like a conspiracy theorist, if there was any way that goal could have been chalked off, it would have been. But it wasn't. And it's 4 goals in succession off the bench. The first Arsenal player in history to do that.
Yeah, and I tell you, 10 Premier League goals in Smith Rowe's career to date. 5 with his right foot, 5 with his left. This was another one for the left-footed collection, and he does finish very well off both feet.
He does. I mean, he always did at youth level, but it was whether or not he could translate that. But there were always hints that Smith Rowe, when he started to develop, if he was going to get into the team, and if he was going to develop to the point where he was going to become a first-team regular, was always going to score goals, because maybe his first couple of appearances in the Europa League, he scored. He scored, if I remember, was it Emery's first pre-season? There were a couple of games where he played in pre-season and he scored. So the signs have been there. I mean, how many goals is that for him now this season? 9 in all competitions, coming up on double figures before the end of the year. You know, this was one of the questions that people had when he inherited that number 10 jersey, when he asked for that number 10 jersey. You know, what can he produce? Because there is a responsibility, there is an onus on you when you're wearing that shirt to create and to score goals. And he's doing both. I don't know how many assists he has this season, but, 9 goals, 3 or 4 assists.
2 assists in the league. I'm not sure in other competitions. But, he's doing a lot of this from the bench as well, which is quite impressive.
What do you think about that? Do you think, I mean, there'd be some people going like, how can you keep this guy on the bench when every time he gets on the pitch, he's showing you what he could do in the previous 70, 80 minutes? I mean, personally, I don't feel like it's an issue, which I think is a really good thing. Like, I don't get any sense that he's disgruntled. I mean, if he's still on the bench in March and he's only getting 10, 15, 20 minutes a game, he's going to be pissed off. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think right now, what's happened is he's lost his place because he was injured. He's come back. The guy that took his place is playing really, really well. The team is playing really, really well. I talked about the if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of aspect to team selection, which I think is part and parcel of it. And if you're a manager and you've got a player on the bench that you know can come on and make an impact, I think that might feed into it a little bit as well. Like, when you think about what we've got on the bench, Eddie Nketiah, Nicolas Pepe, like, if they come on, you go, well, maybe they could do something. But when Smith Rowe comes on, you're like, well, how long is it going to take him to score? So I just think, for me anyway, the fact that it isn't a big issue speaks to the way this group of players appear to be quite together and working as a collective rather than sort of individuals who are putting their own playing time or whatever it might be ahead of anything else.
I think right now he probably comes on and thinks, I'm going to score here. I doubt that he is not enjoying this little run he's having of coming off the bench and scoring. I'm sure he thinks this is brilliant. I come on, 20 minutes to go, everybody's knackered. I know if I make runs into the box, I've got a good chance of scoring, and he comes away from it with a goal bonus and feeling pretty good about himself. I think obviously in the long term he's going to want to play more, but it's not something that concerns me at all. I really feel pleased that we have competition for places in those parts of the pitch.
Yeah.
And also, the other thing to say is, it's a brilliant run he's on. I doubt very much he's going to continue scoring at quite this rate. I was just looking at minutes per goal in the Premier League. I think only Sterling, Vardy, Jota and Salah are scoring more frequently than Emile Smith Rowe.
Yeah.
Whether that lasts, I don't know. But I do think that this is going to be such an important part of his development. I mean, I spoke about Saka, the confidence he can take from what he did at Norwich, the confidence Smith Rowe will take going forward, the inclination he will have to make those runs into the box, the added composure he might have in those situations when they arise, are all going to be benefits to his game. And I think he's been excellent. When you're talking about the most important players at Arsenal this season, even though he's not starting at the moment, he would have to be in contention. And when you look at his contribution over a year, it has been quite amazing. I mean, this was a Boxing Day win, And was it not Boxing Day last year that Emile Smith Rowe came into our Premier League team and really played a huge role in transforming our season? So yeah, you can only take your hat off to him. He's been quite amazing for 12 months now. Yeah,
it's incredible. Fair play. And look, there's a lot of football to play. Particularly next month, there are going to be games. So, this idea that just because a player is, if you want to say out of favour, I don't think out of favour is right. When you're coming on every week and you're scoring every week, you're not out of favour. But when you're out of the starting lineup, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're surplus to requirements or that your time is coming to an end. You can look at Kieran Tierney maybe as an example of that. Somebody who not too long ago people were saying, well, Nuno Tavares, he looks like the player. Is it all done and dusted for Kieran Tierney? And all of a sudden, Tierney is back. He's making assists. He's scoring goals. Nobody's questioning that now. But it's just the way that I guess some of the way football is analysed these days tends to lend itself to a sort of short-termism or what's the word? Like you've got to be down on one side of an argument completely or not. Like it's over for Tierney, that's it, Tavares is the man,
perceptions of players vacillates now, I think, maybe more than ever, and very, very quickly. And it's interesting, Tierney I thought was really good against Norwich. Thomas Partey, who's been heavily discussed of late, I thought was much better as well.
His best game of the season, I think. And some signs. I mean, there have been some signs in the last couple of games that his confidence is returning. He's feeling a bit more comfortable. You could see the way that he was moving, some of the little shimmies, some of the passes he attempted and pulled off are that of the Thomas Partey that we like to think we have. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I do think some interesting things happening in terms of the shape of the Arsenal midfield. I have to actually give a shout out to one of our listeners, because we spoke about Partey and Xhaka last week on the show, and on our Discord, HotRod4490, he said, look, I think, he said, I've got a different take on the Xhaka Partey axis. If you look, Xhaka's played higher up in the last 3 games than he has previously, and I watched it closely against Norwich, and it's definitely true. He's definitely adopting very different positions on the field, much more advanced. There were a lot of times in this game where Tierney didn't overlap to quite the same extent, and when Martinelli was in those forward areas, it was Xhaka supporting him. It's interesting, and Partey, I don't know, I don't know what it is, but the balance of the midfield seemed much better, definitely against Norwich.
Look, I know people have issues with Xhaka, and I've got my own issues with Xhaka. But that trio, if you like, of Xhaka, Partey, Odegaard seems to be functioning pretty well. And myself and Lewis actually had a bit of a discussion about Xhaka, because there was one point, I think it was in the second half, where somebody had the ball out on the left-hand side, and the man screaming for the pass in the centre-forward position is Granit Xhaka.
Yeah, it was the Tierney cutback that missed everybody. Xhaka was the furthest. But
there was another one as well where Xhaka was at the edge of the box. And there was somebody out left. So, there has been a tweak, and I discussed this with Lewis on the Patreon a little bit, and we were trying to figure out the reasons for it. One of which, of course, is instruction, because, Granit Xhaka isn't going and doing that just off his own bat. This is something that's been worked on. Mikel Arteta, look, I think we know he likes to organise things, and he likes the pieces of the puzzle to move around the way he wants them to move around, not because the player themselves feels like they can just go and do whatever they want. But one of the things that I had mentioned or thought might be part of it was the fact that Gabriel looks a lot more calm, a lot more assured, a lot more comfortable this year. And when Xhaka was absent this season because of injury, he sort of took over that mantle of who's got the most touches, who makes the most passes. And so this requirement perhaps that we had, or that Arteta thought we needed, for Xhaka to drop back in as that like auxiliary left-sided centre-half / left-back, whatever it is, isn't quite there when Gabriel is able to pick up some of that slack.
I think that's exactly it. And, you know, we've spoken many, many times, became very accustomed to seeing Xhaka kind of operating in that left-back area. But that wasn't the case and hasn't been the case in the last few games. Against Norwich, he made more passes in the opposition half than any other player on the pitch, which tells you, you know, he was more advanced in his positioning. I think it's about the chemistry and the balance on that left-hand side with Tierney, Martinelli and Xhaka. I think that they don't want Tierney to... This is my perception, but it looks to me like they don't want Tierney to overlap quite so freely. They want Xhaka to provide a kind of inside support to Martinelli, and then when he goes in field, that's when Tierney moves forward. And I do think that midfield three, Partey, Xhaka, Odegaard, I mean, that must have been the plan. When they sat down in pre-season and thought, right, what does our midfield look like? They would have been the three names that they wrote down. And, you know, we haven't seen it together loads. And I do think that now we have had a bit of a run with that trio, then we're seeing some results. And, you know... It's interesting. No player sort of, I think, quite embodies the speed in change of perception that we witness at the moment, maybe than Alex Lacazette, because he's someone who started the season not even getting off the bench. His contract was running out, and it was kind of like, yeah, he's being phased out. Then he came on a couple of times, and there was sort of clamour for him to play, and he came into the team, was playing a second striker. And people are like, this is working. Aubameyang and Lacazette together. Maybe that's the answer. Then we start to struggle a little bit. Odegaard comes back in. Lacazette's out of favour again. And then Aubameyang, the situation blows up. In comes Lacazette, and now he's doing well. And it's like, in the space of between August and Christmas, he's been down, up, down, up, down, up again. You know, and that's the way of it. But I do think... We probably we're all guilty of kind of over-analysing these things a little, you know?
Yeah. There was a good graphic on the By the Numbers piece on Arseblog News that Scott did where, you know, it was the pass network map, which showed Martinelli and Saka as the two furthest players forward. Kieran Tierney, Granit Xhaka, Alexander Lacazette and Martin Odegaard more or less in a line a little bit across there, you know, so it shows you. But then that one big circle for Gabriel in that left space where, you know, he's passing to Holding, he's passing to Partey, he's passing to Tierney, he's passing to Xhaka, he's even firing some into Lacazette at times as well. So I think that is playing a part. Whether you think Xhaka is the ideal man for that particular role, you know, that's a different question.
Yeah,
but certainly that's what...
whole other question.
Yeah, certainly that's what Mikel Arteta has been asking him to do. And in games like this one, in games like the Leeds one, you know, games that on paper, if you want to see Arsenal make progress and show that there's a bit more to us, these are the games that we should win convincingly if we've got aspirations of being a top team. And that's not to be disparaging towards Norwich or to Leeds, but, you know, Norwich are bottom of the table. They had some issues with injuries, COVID, same with Leeds. But we haven't taken advantage of situations like that in the past. We haven't always done that. So to do it in these games, to score goals, to sort of address some of the fundamental issues that we've had doubts and concerns about, and that, you know, for me in particular has been chance creation and goal scoring, to see those improve markedly, you know, is a good thing. And yeah, you know, it's a bigger test obviously in our next game, but when you play these games and you don't do what we did, people criticize. So when we do it, I think we've got to give some credit to the players and the way that the game plans have been executed.
Definitely, and I can certainly see that Arsenal should go and beat this Norwich side, but I think beating them as comprehensively as we did is different, actually. I think that is not something everybody accomplishes, and you have to, everything has to really come together for that to be the case, and it did for Arsenal, and it has done in the last few weeks. And it's it's great. You know, we needed a good run of results clearly after the Everton game. I think Mikel Arteta really needed it after the Aubameyang thing.
And the Everton United games. Those things came very close together.
That's true. And his kind of, I guess his back was to the wall a little bit in that situation, but his team have really come through for him. I think it's good because, without wishing to be a downer, I think January looks quite tough. I think there's some tricky games and a busy schedule on the horizon. But we've given ourselves a really good platform going into the new year, and it might have been nice to add another 3 points, as I say, if we'd had that Wolves game, been able to beat them, but can't complain. It's been excellent. It's been really entertaining as well, hasn't it, the last few weeks?
Fun. It's been good to watch us. It has been good to watch us, and that balance between being an entertaining side and an effective side is something that managers have to contend with. But it's good to watch Arsenal. It's been good to watch some of the play. A young team growing together and all of that kind of stuff. But some of the football we've played has been really, really nice, and I'm glad to see that, and I'm glad to see that kind of development as well, because that's also been a worry. So I've just enjoyed watching the team and the character of it. And like I said to you, I wrote about it on the blog, but I said it to you the night before. I like this team. I like the team. I don't think they're perfect. Arteta says there's still a lot that they've got to get right, a lot to improve on. Kieran Tierney says we've got to keep our feet on the ground. And I can see that. And I think there are going to be some games and some ups and downs and all of that kind of stuff. But I like the team. I like the players in it. I like the character. I like what we're trying to do. I like that it appears to be strategic. And I'm sort of more inclined to, forgiveness is the wrong word, but I'm more inclined to be understanding of when things don't go as well, when I'm on board with the players and what they're doing and how they do things and how they respond, than I would be or have been when there have been players at this football club who shouldn't have been at the football club, at least not for as long as they were at the football club, who, were in some ways unhealthy parts of the club and the team and everything else. So when those things are gone, it's much easier to be a bit more understanding when things aren't quite at the level you want them to be. You've got to accept some variance in performance level and results, because we're not a team that's going to go through a season unbeaten or anything close to that yet. So we are going to have to contend with some difficult days and some difficult results. But when I feel like the effort and everything else is honest from this group of players, I can live with that a bit more easily,
And I think that sentiment that you're expressing is quite widely felt. I mean, one thing that was really evident, I know it's Boxing Day and everyone's in a good mood, but the connection between team and supporters is really strong at the moment. Like, the away fans were in excellent voice, and there is such affection for these players among those travelling fans. I mean, I've been lucky enough to go all over the place watching Arsenal, but the sort of number of individual players whose sort of names are sung raucously or joyously right now feels particularly pronounced, and maybe some credit has to go to the people who've come up with those songs, because we've got a few good songs at the moment. But I genuinely think it's that there is that kind of slight hero worship thing happening, where these fans do love these players. And Kieran Tierney's celebration, I don't know how much of it was caught on camera, but he went wild in front of the away fans.
I have a question about that. So maybe we'll do that in part two. Well, we should take a break here because we have been going a little while. So let's let people pause and make a cup of tea or get a Christmas beer or whatever it might be. Come back in part two for questions and more right after this. Welcome back to part two of the Arsecast Extra. This is the one where we answer questions that you send to us on Twitter at Gunnerblog and at Arseblog, and also on the Arseblog Discord chat server, which you get access to if you are an Arseblog member on Patreon. I took my own advice, James, and got a Christmas beer. So
great.
While I take a slug of this delicious Scraggy Bay, pale ale. I will ask you the question.
Go on.
There has been talk of Ainsley Maitland-Niles leaving the club, going to Roma on loan in January. But from the Discord, Zed Quinners says, would Maitland-Niles leave us short-handed in midfield? We'd be left with Xhaka and Lokonga for like 8 games, because obviously Mohamed El-Neni and Thomas Partey are going to AFCON, although I did just read right now that Partey will be available for the game against Manchester City, which is a good thing. But after that, obviously, he'll be gone. There's 2 games against Liverpool and North London Derby, etc., etc. Maitland-Niles, I mean, do you think that's the kind of deal we can do in January without having something else lined up?
Yeah, I'm a little bit surprised that it seems to be progressing quite so early. I mean, maybe it won't go through, but if it's going to happen, it would be surprising if he played for Arsenal while it's kind of in the offing, you know? I think it does leave us a little light. I have to be honest, you know, Charlie Patino, bless him, was on the bench at the weekend, but it would be very soon, would it not, to ask him to play? I think either Premier League football or, to be honest, a Carabao Cup semi-final against Liverpool, which will be, even if they rotate heavily, quite an intense occasion. So, yeah, what does leave us with? Xhaka, El-Neni... El-Neni will be gone. Xhaka, Lokonga.
As recognised central midfield players, I mean, there are options. I mean, I think you can look at Odegaard and Smith Rowe as players who could play in there if you need them to, depending on the formation you use. But
you can't play that pair in every game, so I think you'd have to start thinking of those players as guys who could play there. You know, if you were being really creative, you could mention Callum Chambers, but we've spoken in part 1 about how he's just not really part of things at the present time. After that, I'm sort of scratching my head. I mean, genuinely, you do start to think maybe Ben White, because he played there a lot for Leeds United a couple of seasons ago, and has done the job very well in the past. And if you've got Rob Holding, maybe that's an option. But you know, it doesn't relieve him of any game time. It doesn't help us rotate him or any other players necessarily. You know, what are we going to do? Ask Ben White to play every game? Just some of them are in midfield now? I don't think so.
It seems to be the plan so far.
It does, actually. He's played a lot of football. Yeah. So I wouldn't rule that out. I think that might happen. But yeah, it does. I mean, I have to be honest and say it does leave us looking a little bit like, if Maitland-Niles were to go early on in the window, I'd be worried about that. What about you?
It wouldn't make a great deal of sense to me, to be honest, to let him go early in the window. Maybe. I mean, I guess. Sorry, I was just going to say, yeah. If they are putting some money on the table, for, you know, a loan fee and a sort of attractive purchase clause. I mean, I've seen 15 million euros mooted. I don't know how true that is. But if that were the case, I could see why they're like, we've got to take this chance to move this player on, because he's never going to sign a new contract. And yeah, it's time. You know, I can see why. I can see why it's time for Ainsley Maitland-Niles to move on. But I just worry, or would have some concerns about the timing of it. You know, if you think you can get a central midfielder in during the January window and you hang on to Maitland-Niles until such time as that player is in and ready to play, then let him go. I can see the logic in that. But not 1st of January, off he goes to Rome and we're there with Xhaka and Lokonga. You know, we spoke about Xhaka, and I think we'll speak a little bit more about him, but you know, the potential for Xhaka to be missing for 3 games, you know, is not far. It's not impossible for that to happen, you know. So he's sort of living under a volcano, you know. At some point it's going to go off.
That's a very apt analogy. But I think, so let's look at January, right? You've got Man City on the 1st. Following week, you've got 2 cup games. Liverpool at home in the first leg of the Carabao Cup, then Forest away in the FA Cup.
Yeah.
The next week, the second leg of the Liverpool game, which may be quite a big game, depending on how you feel about that competition. Then the North London derby on the Sunday. Then it's sort of harder to call, I think, because it depends on what happens in the Cups and various things like that. But Burnley on the 22nd is a given. But that little period, 4 games in a fortnight, 2 of them against Liverpool, 1 against Tottenham, looks testing to me.
Yeah, it is. It is. So you want as deep a squad as you can possibly have, considering that you're already losing the 2 midfielders to AFCON, as well as Aubameyang, who, we know is out in the cold at the moment anyway, and Nicolas Pepe, who really doesn't play a huge amount. So you'd still rather have them around than not, so it is going to be very testing.
Yeah, I mean, the transfer question is a really interesting one. I had one here. Let me have a look. It was about, here we go, Matt Knight on Twitter. Should our league position affect our January business? Or is this the type of short-termism that's led us to successive 8th place finishes? Do we yield to the temptation and clamour to splash out on prime age signings to secure 4th? Or do we stick to the long-term plan?
It's a really good question. Because, look, a lot of what happens and a lot of what you think and a lot of what you do is based on the circumstances. Like, would Arsenal have embraced this youth policy if we'd finished 6th last season, shown a little bit of improvement, and you would say, well, actually, if you could get in 1 or 2 more good players, maybe you could push for 4th. The fact that we went down the road we went down is a consequence of finishing 8th and not having European football and needing to find a different way of doing things. I wonder if, at the upper echelons of Arsenal, the manager, the technical director, the owners, if they had realistically considered being part of the top 4 at this point of the season. Maybe it's something that they hoped for, but I suspect when they were thinking about, like, what can we do this season? Let's just get ourselves back into that top 6, take a little step forward, then we can build on that again. But here we are in a pretty decent position. And I wonder if that might just change the way they're thinking about what they need to do next in terms of transfer market. It is, on the one hand, an opportunity if you can find the right player. On the other, if you can't find them, do you compromise? I'm not sure. Sure.
The thing is, the African Cup of Nations group stage ends, I think, around the 18th, 19th January. Certainly Ghana's last game is on the 18th. So we might get those players, some of those players. I mean, they may progress further in the competition, but we might get one of those guys or some of those guys back after that hectic fortnight I just discussed. So are you going to do a deal that might only be for a fortnight? Do you know what I mean? In terms of an emergency signing, I don't think you do that. I think if you bring someone in, it's because they're a long-term target. But really, like, the time we need them most is in about a week.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how likely that is.
Yeah, but also, when we talk about circumstances, there are circumstances that involve, let's say, the striking position, because we do have, I thought it was quite interesting, Arteta talking about the cloud that was over the strikers at the club right now, because Lacazette and Keddy are heading for 6 months left on their contracts. I don't think you can fault in any way the commitment of those players when they're playing, but they may not be part of the future. The Aubameyang situation remains up in the air. We don't know if he's going to come back after the AFCON or not. So sometimes circumstances dictate that you have to do something, whether it's midfield, whether it's striker or whatever it might be. So that situation coupled with, I said this on the Patreon pod with Lewis, when I watched that first half against Norwich, it was so blindingly clear to me that the striker is the next thing that this team needs, which is to take nothing away from what Lacazette has done in the last couple of weeks. I think he has been very good and very effective. But, when he missed that headed chance, I'm thinking, that's what we need our centre forward to do, as well as doing some of the good stuff that Lacazette has been doing. We need him to be a penalty box threat as well, which, he isn't really. He's doing most of his good work outside of the box or slightly deeper. His average position, when you look at it, is a midfield position based on that passing network that I referenced earlier. He's basically playing in midfield. So we need that little bit of extra something there. So I do wonder if the player is available, if they might do it in January. But I think it'll be difficult.
We spoke about Maitland-Niles. Do the club have to take this opportunity to move him on? What if someone comes in for Eddie Nketiah, in January, and he's saying, I won't sign a new contract? And if Aubameyang's not available for selection, but you get the money on the table for Eddie, guaranteed, then, maybe you've got to take it, and then it necessitates some business. I think it's going to be a really interesting month. I think the club will try. And I think one thing we know about Mikel Arteta, every transfer window that rolls around, he is motivated to improve this squad. And he never said, Arsene Wenger would always kind of bat these questions away a bit and say, well, we're very happy with the players we have. Arteta's always got that thing of like, if there's an opportunity to improve the squad, we'll do it. I feel like you need that bit of agitation, that friction to work on the people above to say, look, let's push on.
That's a really good point, actually. And I hadn't considered it, but it is true. It's one of the things that he is most forthright about the way that you can use the transfer market to evolve and improve the squad. I mean, when he first took over, there was, there were some quotes about like how the only way that we can do this is by spending money. And to bring players in. And he's quite non-committal about lots of things. When he talks about a disciplinary breach for Aubameyang, that's kind of all you get. And when he's asked about, Smith Rowe or Saka or Martin Odegaard, he praises them, but at the same time offsets that with something else like, well, that's what we expect. That's what they should do. That's what we need from these players. They've got to keep going. They've got to keep improving, etc., etc. So, he praises on one hand, but on the other, he's trying to keep people's feet on the ground. But, he obfuscates a little bit about certain issues and certain decisions that he makes. But on this, he's been pretty forthright all the way through ever since he's taken over. So let's see what happens in January. Yeah.
And I think when he wants a player and he feels that opportunity is there, he really digs in his heels to try and make that happen. And I'm sure he'll be working on the owners to put their hands in their pockets again, Can I ask you just a follow-up on that one, given that we were talking about this opportunity we have and the fact that we have got ourselves into a good position. And, at the start of the season, if you'd asked me what a successful season for Arsenal would be, I would say, top six, more points, more goals, signs of progression, not just the league position, but how we get there. But we have a question from Dushyant Gupta, who's at Dushyant AFC on Twitter. He says, morning, guys. My question for today is, if we finish in the top six instead of the top four, would this season be considered a success or a failure? I think that's just an interesting discussion point. Yes, it is. It really is. And I think a lot depends on how that happens. I'll give you the case of kind of Unai Emery's sole entire season in charge of Arsenal. He narrowly missed out on the Champions League and reached the European final, but the nature of how they missed out on the Champions League and how they performed in that final really was defining for him in some respects. And I think a lot will depend. It's quite difficult to say how it will feel. You know, if Arsenal are in fourth spot until the final day and chuck it away with or not the final day, but the final few weeks and chuck it away with a similarly poor run at the end of the season, that will feel very different to, a closely fought race where we are actually chasing somebody and just miss out, and it's through no great fault of our own. It's really difficult to know. I think that I still am very cautious about Arsenal's chances of finishing in the top four, and I recognise we are in the top four.
Yeah,
but when I look at the squads, particularly the degree of experience and quality that still lies in that Manchester United squad, if they can somehow figure out a way to make it work, I still think I still make them favourites, actually.
Yeah, look, I think I'm really pleased with where we are, and I'm pleased with the sort of the ability to deal with adversity, even if some of that adversity remains self-inflicted. And it's failure versus success, they're two quite definitive terms. You're right to say how it happens will play a part. Because I wonder how Leicester fans view their seasons when you think about where they finished in the last couple of years. I mean, I'm not saying they're punching way above their weight, but finishing in European places or thereabouts, but they were in the top four for most of the season on both occasions and then fell away right at the end. Yeah. Is that must feel like failure, but on the basis of what you expect pre-season is probably there or thereabouts. You know what I mean? Which isn't to say it's success either, but it is how you fail or how things go wrong that will define this. Look, I'm just pleased that we're sitting here, we're heading towards 2022, and we are where we are, and we're talking about this possibility of being in the top four, and it's not a ludicrous possibility. It's not pie in the sky. Ludicrous. It's not like, are you fucking insane? Which might have been the discussion a few months ago, and a legitimate discussion a few months ago. So to be in this position is pleasing. Let's see what we can do. Let's see how much consistency we can produce in the second half of the season. And we'll know come May whether it feels like a failure or whether it feels like success.
Yeah. By the way, you're supposed to ask me about Kieran Tierney. People will be wondering what happened to Kieran Tierney.
Okay, well, hang on. Let me just see if I can. I've got to find this question now. You've caught me off guard here. Okay, it comes from Sammy, who's at AFC Sammy10, and he says, "Goodly morning," or "Goodly afternoon," but he said it in the morning, so he's correct. Anyway, what do we make of Kieran Tierney's constant anger at scoring goals? If you look at each goal he scored for Arsenal, he never cracks a smile. It's always rage. Does he need to learn not to expend so much energy during them and maybe stay fitter? I don't quite know what the correlation between his fitness and his rage face when he scores goals is, but what do you make of that? What do you make of his celebrations, his sort of primal screams or whatever it might be?
Yeah. Well, he's just got a very Northern European temperament in some way. You know, he's got that. That's his character. Like Kieran Tierney, it doesn't surprise me massively that he and Arteta sort of developed quite a good understanding, because I think they're both quite intense characters. I think that although we sort of make light of some of Kieran Tierney's habits and, the Tesco plastic bag thing and stuff like that, I think he is actually quite a serious person. And I think that you see that in the way he approaches the game, and I think that's partly what Arteta loves about him. But I also think that in that particular celebration, I think there may have been two things contributing to it. One is that I think not long before that he'd been fouled, maybe, and was sort of reacting to that. But I think maybe a bit of frustration as well. I mean, he's had quite a stop-start, difficult start to the season. He was out the side, on the bench for quite a long period, and may have been aware that people were questioning, his status as Arsenal's first-choice left-back. And I think he has come back from that really impressively, and maybe that goal capped it. And there might have been a bit of a release of frustration in that celebration. But listen, I loved it, and the fans absolutely loved it. It was a really raucous moment.
Yeah, I thought it was great. I like that. Just a bit of fucking fuck you-ness to the celebration.
Yeah.
Which I think was directed as much at the Norwich fans, because it did come after that period where the game was getting a little bit tetchy and where it was getting a bit physical, and it was a bit like, okay, I'm going to run behind the goal, I'm going to celebrate here, I'm going to jump in the
I thought
air,
he might get booked, actually. I genuinely thought he might get booked, because it felt quite inciting, and the referees are understandably sensitive about that. But it was a bit of a sort of fuck you goal and a bit of a fuck you celebration, I think. Yeah, I like it. Let's hope we see more of it as well. Yeah, it was great. I mean, I love a Kieran Tierney goal, and as I said in part one, I think that's a much better finish than it looks. The simplicity of it, I think, takes away from the quality to a certain extent. Guided it beyond the keeper. Yeah, absolutely. Let me have a look for another question now. We spoke about Saka, really. Let me ask you this one. Sorry, let me ask you this one, because from the Discord, we talked about Tierney's finish. Yeah. Gagan J says, have you noticed how many of our goals recently are low strikes? Do you think we're deliberately working on this in training, or is it just natural variance? I hadn't noticed, but maybe it is something they work on. Maybe it is. I mean, there's a logic to that, right? Low in the corner, very, very difficult for a goalkeeper. Yeah. That's a good finish. I mean, we are taking our chances well at the present time, by and large, a few exceptions, so could be. Well, listen, we talked about this right at the top of the show. Javino's forehead on Discord says, are your expectations for the City game that we'll lose and hope that we do so with dignity, or has that changed over the last few weeks? I want us to be a bit more competitive against them than we have been. And there were a couple of 1-0 games, which I think City were well on top in anyway. And they didn't really have to get out of second gear. And I mean, my hope for this is that Arteta doesn't go too galaxy-brained, as he has a tendency to do when he comes up against Pep, Like, he knows me, I know him. What will he expect me to do? Aha! I will do something that he'd never expect. Was Willian at false 9 one of those? I think it was. The Etihad, we did do that, yeah. So let's not do that. Let's accept the fact that what we're doing well, and try and do that against Manchester City, even though it is going to be extremely difficult. They're quite good, aren't they? They are quite good. I think that's fair to say. It would be really... I mean, the game at the Etihad earlier in the season, we were down to 10 men. Was it just before halftime or just after halftime? I can't remember. Before, I think. Just before, okay. So, you're playing a full 45 minutes against Man City with 10 men. We were a couple of goals down anyway at that point. Simple goals, though. Wasn't one of them like a header from Gundogan? Our central defenders didn't really cover themselves in glory. So, look, I don't really have an expectation that this is a game we can win. If you were to offer me a draw right now, I'd bite your hand off. But what I don't want to see is the kind of hammering that we got earlier in the season, the kind of hammering that we got against Liverpool. It feels a bit like that Liverpool game a couple of months ago or 6 weeks ago, whenever it was, when things have been going pretty well and we said, well, this now is the real test of how far this team has come.
And in some ways, I don't think that's quite right. I don't think it's quite where you can really draw conclusions from what the team is capable of. Because if you can beat Norwich 5-0, if you can beat Leeds 4-0, 4-1, whatever it was, if you can beat West Ham, if you can beat Southampton, if you can beat these teams around you, you can still end up in a good position in the league, and you could still achieve more or less what you want to achieve. But you can't, I don't think you can keep losing these games by big margins and convince people that the other side of your season, even if it's good, is as sustainable as you would like it to be. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, yeah. I don't know how true that feeling is.
That's just my feeling. I'm not saying that's definitely the case. I'm just saying that, we've talked about the team taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 1 step forward, 2 steps back, whatever it might be. And I mentioned that I like how we deal with adversity, but I don't want us to be always firefighting at points in the season when, you could... the Everton and United games are a great example of this, where they're two, big clubs, but both of them not in great shape. And you're saying, well, these are games where we could really show that we're capable of this, that, and the other. And instead, we displayed some of the old failings, and that raises doubts and concerns, which are understandable. And then we respond the way we respond, which has been absolutely brilliant. But I think we need to show that I don't mean go toe-to-toe with Manchester City. I don't think that's realistic at this stage of the development of this team.
No, nor do I.
But don't make it easy for them. Make them, if they're going to win this game, at least make them work for it, And in previous games, we haven't made it that difficult.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. I think that these big games, in inverted commas, I think they weigh heavier in terms of perception. The points are always the same. Do you know what I mean? You get the same points for beating Man City as you do for beating Norwich, but the perception that comes with them it tends to sort of resonate more. Arsenal at the moment, a lot of people are saying, well, they're only beating Norwich, they're only beating Newcastle, they're only beating Leeds, but ain't everybody doing that? You've got to go and do it, and there is a certain degree of consistency Arsenal have shown, I think, in games against smaller teams or teams you would expect them to beat. It's been very different against the likes of particularly Liverpool and City and Chelsea. The difference this time is it's at home, which should help. Our home record is very good, as discussed. It's still going to be a mighty test, and I think Man City are certainly favourites. But yeah, a bit like the 4th versus 6th question, a lot of it will depend on how it happens and how it makes people feel. I certainly think we've got more of a chance than we would have done if we'd had to play Wolves. I do think that. I think that
I agree.
A bit more fitness, a bit more rest, the players getting a day off that they wouldn't have otherwise had. I hope, in theory, it's all in the positive column there.
I hope we've got Tomiyasu back. I don't know what the situation with him, how long he has to isolate for, if he's tested positive, and all the rest of it. But I hope he is available for this one because, Rob
He's
Holding,
one of our better defenders.
Yeah, exactly. And you could have the White-Gabriel partnership again. Rob Holding's been caught out a couple of times in the last few games against Man City, headed goals that he should be doing better with. And I don't think that's a coincidence. So if we get White back or White back into the centre and Tomiyasu at right back, I think we've got a better chance, certainly. But, it's going to be a very different team from the one that played at the Etihad. It is different because we've got those new signings. We'll have basically a whole new back four and goalkeeper for this game. A midfield that appears to be functioning. some forwards that appear to be scoring. So, there's some silver linings there, if you want to look at it like that. So,
yeah, fingers crossed.
Okay.
Anyway.
Yeah, look, you just don't know. It's impossible to really predict, other than it's going to be extremely difficult because City are so good. They're so good. The Land on Discord says, what is it about Granit Xhaka that 90% of our fans are done with him, and 10% of our fans, I don't know if the percentages are right though, all of the managers he's had in his professional career and all of his teammates swear by him? I think Xhaka is very much a Marmite player when it comes to the fan base. No two ways about that. But the managers and the coaches always pick him. The players seem to love him. He's very popular in the dressing room. He is seen as one of the leaders. And he says, have you ever seen a player like this for any team? And I don't think I have. I don't think I've ever seen a player cross the line as many times as Xhaka has, in terms of, the disciplinary things, the red cards, some of the stupidness, which is, any player can make a mistake. With him, it always feels a bit more like, oh, well, that's it now. We can't have any more of this. But he always seems to come back from it. But I think it's genuinely fascinating. Even if you're not a fan of Xhaka, it's genuinely fascinating how he operates. And I think there's a measure of cognitive dissonance on his part as well. I really enjoyed the interview with Amy in The Athletic. I thought it was very good. I think he's an interesting character. He drives me mad at times. There are other things about the way that he thinks about, his role that I think are quite admirable. If you want to be a bit of a leader or a bit of a muscle or whatever it might be, like, it would help if you weren't as clumsy and didn't have that reputation and all the rest. But I can't fault the intent. But it's just like, I wish it was maybe happening at another club, but it is really quite interesting.
Yeah, I think that the answer to this is basically that there are things we don't see, and that is kind of the difficulty of in our position as fans, and even in a position as a journalist, is that you're reporting, analysing a certain percentage of what goes on inside a football club. Even the most informed people, do not know every instance of every dynamic. Take the Aubameyang situation, right? Like, it's been quite extensively reported and there's a lot of detail in there, but I wouldn't hesitate to say that there must be aspects of it that we don't know.
Oh, 100%. There's quite a bit about it that we're not aware of for
exactly. If you're looking at a situation and it doesn't make sense, then the answer is usually, well, there's something there that you're unaware of. And I sort of think the Xhaka conundrum is part of that too, that we can't fully appreciate his role within the dressing room because we are not in the dressing room. And it's not for us. It's not performative. It's something between those colleagues that we are not part of. And, I don't think we'll ever close that gap, really. And I think he is a particularly tricky person because he's so uncompromising and so, I guess, single-minded would be a kind way of saying it. That I think, there's not that sort of dialogue between supporter and player, because for him, his job is very clear. And that comes across in the interview. He's like, I serve the club. And he doesn't seem to regard the fans as a big component in that.
I don't know that I would agree with that. I think he does recognise that the fans are a major part of it, but his very specific dialogue with the fans, at times has been unacceptable. I think it's fair to say it's unacceptable. And look, I don't want to go over the whole thing again, but I think he was in some ways a victim of the indecision and foofing around of Unai Emery when it came to handing out the captain's armband that summer, you know? So I'm not excusing him, but I think there was a whole build up to that thing, which I guess was frustration on Xhaka's part, because he obviously felt he should have been the captain, straight away. And instead, Emery sat on it for a couple of months. And then, by the time it had happened, the team was beginning to fall apart. And, Xhaka was in some ways a lightning rod for some of that frustration. But at the same time, the way he reacted and the way he behaved was not right. And it was not acceptable. But, I mean, he is who he is. So whether you like him or you don't like him, this is what we're going to get from him. And Mikel Arteta, who I think people might say is someone who doesn't put up with a great deal that he feels is either unacceptable or injurious to what he's trying to build and trying to create at Arsenal, is willing to deal with Xhaka and all his various foibles,
Yeah. And I guess, that's what I mean about there must be something in that gap. I mean, you could look at that and go, well, Mikel Arteta is potentially insane. He is he is a madman. Why would he possibly do that? Or Granit Xhaka is blackmailing Mikel Arteta. I think that those kinds of solutions are unlikely. The likeliest reality is that the negative things that we perceive are offset by positive things that we do not perceive. And that's my impression as well. That's my informed impression from speaking to people. He is held in extremely high regard. And when I say about the fans, I just mean that Xhaka's single-mindedness and his what is that word? Sort of lack of self-reflection. Maybe that's unfair. It is potentially a weakness and can be a weakness, but it can also be a source of strength. I was very struck by that interview with Willian that did the rounds recently, where he was talking about how unhappy he was at Arsenal. And he spoke about the fans didn't take to him because he came from Chelsea and he wasn't performing. And the clear sort of impression was that these things were kind of cumulative in his unhappiness and contributing to his underperformance. Whereas I could never really envisage Xhaka being bothered in that way, because his level of self-conviction appears to be incredibly strong.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I didn't feel that way at all about the Willian interview, by the way. So
No?
No.
What did you think?
I thought, well, maybe if you tried, maybe if you tried a bit harder.
Yeah.
That's
Professional footballers try, though. They do try.
I don't think he really did. I think he went through the motions. I think he thought it was going to be easy, and he was found out.
Yeah. Well, I think that...
I mean, obviously the Chelsea thing played a part, because it is very difficult to warm to a player who's played for a local rival who you've disliked. It's like Silvestre coming to Arsenal. It's like, how the fuck am I supposed to ever get on board with this guy? That's just part and parcel of football. But I think you can win people over if you make it... Look, I don't mean that he should have just run around like a madman, but there were times where you could see he played poorly. The team played poorly in that period as well. So I'm not saying it's all down to him, but there were times where he just didn't bother. And that's what swung the fans, I think, personally.
Impossible to say, isn't it? Because we all arrive with preconceived ideas.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
I know what I believe, though. I know what I believe.
Well, you sound like Granit Xhaka. But I think that's my point. I think even if we take Willian at face value, the idea that the opinion of the fans would influence his performance I don't think would occur to Granit Xhaka. I really don't. And that's it makes him, I think, quite unusual And it is an unusual situation. I know some people are so bored of it, to be honest.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of people today saying, like, oh, bloody hell, everyone's talking about Xhaka again. And I get it. And so for some people, it's not about his personality at all. They just don't think he's a good enough player.
Yeah.
And that's completely valid.
Have you got one more? Let's do one more quick one each if we can.
Yeah, sure. I haven't really, to be honest. I've sort of done everything I wanted to do. But if you've got two, I'll happily do them.
Okay, I've got one here I've got a couple from the Discord. So my Scooter Sasha says, upon rewatch of the game, it seemed that Saka deliberately stomped on Williams' leg after a hard foul. Do you also think it was deliberate? If so, is it anything to be concerned about, or just chalk it off to a one-off bad decision? It seems like he's getting a bit fed up with the rotational fouling. While I totally understand the frustration, I hope it doesn't manifest itself into something that could get him sent off.
Didn't see it, personally. I'm not even being Arsene Wenger about it. Didn't see it. Did you see it?
I did see it, yeah. There was a foul towards the Norwich penalty box area, and he just seemed, that kind of tangle of legs thing. Yeah, he just seemed to sort of land his studs a little bit on the back of the guy's leg. But it certainly wasn't, like if the guy standing on Tomiyasu's face was 100 out of 100 deliberate, which I think it was. Mm-hmm. This was like 17. And it wasn't even designed to hurt him or anything like that. I think if Bukayo Saka wants to give a bit back to a guy who's kicked him a few times in a match, I've got no problem with it. I've got no problem with it because, if the perception grows that you're somebody who can be kicked, you are kicked. And that's what sort of feeds into the stuff I talked about earlier on about the reaction and about the team and the manager standing up for him when he does get kicked, because he gets kicked a lot. He's fouled more than any other Arsenal player. So I don't really have any issue with Saka giving a bit back. I mean, I don't think he's going to turn into Joey Barton. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's not going to run
Wilfred
on the pitch.
Zaha on our hands.
Yeah, exactly. I mean? Yeah. I mean, that's a good example, actually, from the other day. Stemming from frustration that he probably carries around from how often he's fouled as well, because he's that kind of player, because he carries the ball.
Exactly. I think it's sort of, that's built over cumulatively over his career. To be honest, maybe I'm being kind of too naive, but I'm not sure Saka is really that sort of character. Certainly yet at his age. I think I wouldn't mind it, a bit of nastiness from him, but I don't necessarily see it right now.
Okay, final one. Big Joe Wall 72 says, very random question. What is going on with Martinelli's socks? I'm trying to find out. They appear to be ripped in the middle, halfway up the back of his calves. I don't know if I've just noticed, but it's been like that for the last few games. And I wonder, is it like that because we can notice, because the dark socks, the bit of underneathiness shows much more easily than when you're wearing white socks or red and white stripes. So.
He's not the only one doing it. It's happening all around the Premier League. A lot of players are cutting holes in the back of their socks, yeah. Wow. So I actually thought yesterday I'm going to try and find out why that is. I have no idea what the cause is, but there are lots of players doing it. What could it possibly be?
I don't know. Unless they get very sweaty shins and they want to let a little air in to get underneath the shin pads or whatever it is. I mean, the socks cannot be that restrictive that they need to, free their calves so their calves can express themselves.
Here we go.
Oh.
Carl Walker apparently was one of the first to do it regularly.
Oh, God.
And he cuts his socks with scissors. Apparently, it is to do with constricting the muscles in the lower half of the leg.
Really?
Releasing the pressure fends off the possibility of cramps and can prevent pain in latter periods of match.
They're socks. They're not like the ones you have to wear if you go on a transatlantic flight to stop you getting a deep vein thrombosis. Those kind of real tight ones.
They are quite elastic, though, football socks, no?
Yeah. They're socks.
I know, but, I guess what happens is a player does this to try it because they've had a history of muscular problems or something. They do it. They score that day. They do it for the rest of their career. Do you know what I mean? I'm sure. Yeah. I don't know how scientific it is, but it seems to be a trend. And listen, it seems to be working for Martinelli. So he can cut loads of holes in his clothes, as far as I'm concerned. If he keeps playing like this.
Yeah, sure, that's fine. Well, I'm glad we've got that mystery solved. Oh,
I've just seen the Saka stamp on Twitter as I was just literally hopped back on Twitter. I've just seen it. Yeah, he does do it, actually.
Yeah. But it is like a 17 compared to the other 100. It's just one of those where, you know, look, I'm here and you're down there, and now you're down there and I'm up here, as opposed to me being down there and you up there after you've just kicked me. So don't forget I'm here while you're down there.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm sort of proud of him for doing that.
Yeah, I like it. I think he should do it. He's got to, look, he's got to... Look, it shouldn't be on him. I think he needs more protection from referees. 100%. I have a feeling that other England players would get more protection. Like if it was Harry Kane being kicked with that frequency, he would get an awful lot more free kicks, or at least there would be a lot more yellow cards dished out to the tacklers than there have been to the guys who've tackled Bukayo Saka. So, he does have to, I don't mean just stand up for himself, but, he has to let the opposition defenders know that he can't be intimidated. Small thing, but it is part of what he has to do in order to stand up to this, and hopefully, in combination with better protection from referees, it's something that will go away. But the thing is, good players get kicked a lot and fouled a lot.
Yeah.
And he's one of those where, I'm not saying if you remember how often Jack Wilshere got fouled, because of the way that he plays, those shifts of balance, as you talked about earlier on, sometimes the skill level of the attacker is far superior to the tackling ability of the defender. And that ends up with fouls. So
it does look like, that's going to be something he's going to have to deal with over the course of his career.
All right, well, look, we should leave it there and just take this moment to wish everybody out there listening, given that this is the last Arsecast Extra before the new year, a very happy, healthy, and prosperous and healthy, in particular healthy, 2022. And thank you for being with us throughout 2021. Hopefully we've been able to... keep you on the straight and narrow in terms of your Arsenal experience, and we do really, really appreciate everything that you do in terms of listening, downloading, subscribing, and all the rest of it. So we want to wish you a very happy new year.
Happy New Year, everybody. Yeah. Let's hope 2022 is a good one.
Let's hope so. All right, we will be back after the Manchester City game.
Indeed we will.
Gulp sound
Possibly
effect.
on the Sunday.
Oh, yes, we are, aren't we? We're doing it on the Sunday. That's right. Thank you for the reminder. We will be here on Sunday then with a brand new Arsecast Extra for you. So join us for that. Until then, take it easy.
Bye-bye.